Okay, so we have over here two quotes, one from the Talmud, Baba Batra, and one from Kabbalah, from the Arizal, which is called Eitz Chaim. So the first one says, all that the Holy One, blessed be he, created in his world, he created male and female. And the next part is, the whole universe functions according to the principium of masculine and feminine. So if you can just look at those two for a moment and tell me what you think they might be teaching us or telling us.
Well, I think that it's a distinction between, in the first one, it's actually talking about man and woman. But in the second one, it's more about gender, and that all things have a gendered perspective to them. It doesn't necessarily mean, man and woman. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, that the feminine totally lives inside the woman. It means that there's feminine perspectives that, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, you can take on those perspectives. And that there's things in the universe that, track to those gender perspectives.
Okay, very interesting. Marianne, did you want to share something?
I just, a lot like Luann was saying, I think it has to do with the energies, not necessarily from a man and a woman, but that the whole universe has these energies and they balance out each other. I believe it has something to do with that. The feminine energy, the masculine energy, it doesn't have to be particularly from, like Luann said, a woman or a man. I think it associates with everything.
Okay, so yeah, there is definitely the idea that masculine and feminine energy are present in more than just a man or a woman. So there's a statement which says, "Mibsari echazeh Elokah," which means, "From my flesh I shall see God." Okay, which basically is telling us that there's God, an infinite creator who can seem very distant from us, very hard to relate to, very hard to understand or grasp or comprehend. So this phrase teaches us that there are actually ways that we can attempt to understand God. And one of those ways is that by looking at ourselves and by looking at certain things around the world, we are able to come to understand God. Now, how does this work? So God created the world, and he wants us to know him. He wants us to try and understand him. There is a commandment to know God. Now, as I started to say just a moment ago, this obviously presents challenges. God is infinite and we are finite. How can a finite being attempt to understand an infinite God? So before we enter into the answer, I just want to point out that obviously we have to be careful over here, because we have to realize that as much as we do come to know God, inevitably there will be a lot more beyond what we understand that still exists, that, in certain respects, some of which we could still attempt to understand further. But we're really touching the tip of the iceberg as we start out, for sure. So the world is full of God's energy, and God has various energies through which he created the world. So if we examine these energies, they can help us understand God to some degree. So this is true in general and different processes that take place in the world. And it's also true more specifically within the human being themselves. We see that actually from the name by which the human is called in Hebrew, Adam, which is the name for man or human. The phrase that comes from there is Adamel Elyon, which means I am similar to the one above. So God created us, as we know, in his image, right? It says in the Torah, right in the beginning, where it relates the story of creation, it tells us about the creation of man. So what does it say? God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Okay, so let me break that down. So first of all, it says that God created man in his image. And what was that image? Male and female. So God has within himself these energies, or so to say, these attributes or characteristics, which are male and which are female. So if we want an accurate or true reflection of God, it would include both masculine attributes and energies and feminine attributes and energies. Now, what happened afterwards? Originally, man was created male and female as one being, and then God divided this first human into two, and there was an individual male, man, Adam, and the female woman who was called Chava. And as we've discussed probably a few years ago, when we spoke about marriage, since a man and woman were originally one, so that that unity and oneness is embedded in our psyches, even as we have been divided into a man and a woman. And that's really the force, the deep force within a man and a woman that compels them to look for the other, for their second half, for the soulmate, so that they can join together with them and reunite and return to that original wholeness that they originally were at the time of their creation. So now that we see how originally it was one, male and female, and then God made them distinct. God made a male entity and a female entity. So we're talking about them now as energies, okay? Not as individual people, but as energies or as forces, okay? So what is the masculine or male energy, and what is the female or feminine energy? So in a very abstract way, female energy is internal, okay? So let's look at the example of breathing, okay? There's two directions. You breathe in and you breathe out, okay? Inhale and exhale. Mm-hmm. So that energy of inhaling, that's a feminine energy, drawing life inward, okay? Drawing energy inward to provide life and energy to yourself. Exhaling, breathing outward is projecting from your energy to the environment and the world around you. So that motion, that direction is considered to be a masculine energy and attribute. When you project and influence from that which surrounds you rather than that which is inside of you. Another similar example is if we think about thought versus speech. Okay, when I'm thinking about something, you don't know what I'm thinking about until I tell you what I'm thinking. When I speak, it's a product of what was in my mind before I started speaking. So the thought is more internal and hidden, and the speech is revealing. Now, obviously, women don't only have inner and internal attributes, and men also do not only have outward projective energies, okay? We live in a world of integration, and things are connected one with the other. So you could find like you mentioned at the beginning in our discussion, Luan, that you'll have some inner or more female energies that you can see by a man, and there will be women who also have certain male or masculine, shall we say, energies. I'll give you an example about what I mean when I say that the world is one of integration. So let's imagine a company which has different departments. One department is in charge of marketing. One department deals with customer service. Another department deals with the ethos and the vision of the company. Another one works on product development. Okay, so if each and every part of the company is very distinct, because the individuals in each department are very qualified for their own specific department, so they can each be focusing solely on what their mandate is. Okay, the marketing department focuses only on the marketing. But if we think about it, obviously there's going to be something lacking in this model, because really each department, they can't function in isolation. They need to contribute one to the other. The department, which might be the leadership, which deals with what the vision of the company is and what the goals are, needs to inform the marketing department what that ethos and what that vision is. The product development company would do, department would do well to consult with the customer service department to get feedback and find out what the customers are saying about the product. Is there something else that they could be adding or changing about the product to make it a better fit for their clientele? So while each individual department has its strengths and is specifically qualified and trained in its area and needs to focus on its area, they still need to contribute to and take from the other departments in the company. So when God created the world, obviously there's this infinite godly light, which cannot realistically be contained in a limited, ordered, finite world. So God chose to create different channels through which to send forth his divine energy in a way that would allow his divine light to enter the world in a way that could facilitate creation. So God divided his energy into 10 channels, which are in the Kabbalah as known as 10 Sephirot, which are really the translation, a loose translation might be attributes, energies, characteristics. There are different ways that God chooses to reveal himself to the world and to create the world. So each of these attributes, they don't stand in isolation one from the other. Just like the example that I just brought about the company, if each one of them would stand on its own and think of itself as the most important way in which God expresses himself, then while that might be a wonderful character trait, an attribute in its own right, if it doesn't give room for another, then the world loses out, and it also loses out because when you have harmony between different characteristics and different attributes, there's a beauty that comes out of that doesn't exist when you have an attribute on its own. So in that kind of similar way, while we will say that certain character traits and attributes are considered to be female or feminine by nature, and other characteristics lend themselves to be more masculine by nature, that doesn't mean that you're going to find, and we know this obviously from our experience, that all women are completely in the feminine category with their characteristics, and all men are in the masculine category. because again, these character traits, they contribute one to the other, and they work in harmony together for a better outcome. Having said that, if we want to look into the core of what the essence is of a woman and the essence of a man, the essence of each one of them relate to the specific character traits that come out of the feminine energy or of the masculine energy. So again, a woman can have a number of different talents and abilities, some which relate more to being a female, some which might be considered to be more masculine, and that's fine and that's wonderful, and that's what makes up her personality and gives her the ability to accomplish that which she needs to. But when she questions herself about what her true essence is and what her deeper role is in life, we get our direction from the feminine energy, which God put into this world. Is it clear so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. We are talking Kabbalah here. We are talking Jewish mysticism. So a lot of it can be abstract. So if there's any clarification or any question, please feel free. So let's try and elaborate on what we just said and flesh it out a bit more. So we're going to go back, before we speak about the Sephirot, which I mentioned, we're going to go back a little bit to two main energies, two main godly forces which keep the world in existence. There's a godly force which is known as Sovev, which means surrounding. And then you have Mimale, which means to fill. So there's the way that God relates to the world, where he is removed from the world because really he is beyond the world. He's not limited by the physical parameters of a physical world. So perhaps he's sort of slightly distant and sending his energy towards the world to keep it in motion. Then you have the level of then you have a godly energy which fills the world. It's a more constricted form of godly energy, but it has the advantage in that it's actually able to penetrate and enter into this physical world. So when we talk about masculine and feminine, the masculine energy is the one that sort of imposes itself, perhaps from a distance or perhaps from the outside, to have an impact on something. And the feminine energy is an energy that the feminine godly energy is one which has an impact from within that which exists. So again, to bring an example to illustrate this idea, you can have a teacher who is very brilliant, a genius, and this teacher is transmitting their brilliance to the students. Now, the method of the teaching is to just rain down concepts and just keep on putting out those concepts at the students again and again, without with a lot of intensity and a lot of frequency, and eventually it sort of penetrates the students' minds and they come to understand it, but that they're not necessarily taking this information and making it their own. They can repeat what the teacher has told them. Perhaps they can reword some very lofty ideas and complex concepts. But to say that they themselves can go through the process which their teacher has gone through, probably not. Then you have an educator who comes along and looks at the student's abilities and looks at the student's strengths and weaknesses and tries to analyze and work with the student to sharpen their skills, to nurture their abilities, and to raise them up from the ground to help them reach the greatest heights that they can in their study and in their learning and in their understanding. Now, the second method obviously is much longer and more complicated. It takes a lot more work from the teacher, but the end result will be that the student themselves can actually apply and utilize the skills and the abilities that they now have as their own in new and different situations. So this would be sort of a parallel to those two different energies, where you can come from the outside and give a very complex lecture in an hour on some very intellectual topic, and you may have said a lot and taught at a very high standard, but how many of your students actually understood and absorbed what you said is not entirely clear. Whereas you have another teacher who could spend days, weeks, months, but that student will be able to stand up on their own. So it's a different method and a different way of approaching the same situation. And again, so we have these two energies, the masculine energy, which is related more to imposing your own theories and your own understandings on another, versus the female energy, which is more focused on cultivating the abilities that exist and uplifting them and improving them. So we've spoken about how God created man, male and female, and then divided into two, and how we have these two energies of the masculine and the feminine, which equally reflect God. You need both of them in order to come to understand God. We spoke about how, being that man is created in God's image, when we look at the human and we analyze internally the characteristics of male and a female, that can help us to come to understand God. And we brought these two specific energies of God, through which God uses to create the world and to keep the world running, which is the godly energy, which is perhaps loftier but more aloof, versus the godly energy, which is a bit more restricted but can actually enter into the world and affect from within. So let's move on. Let's return back to the Sphirot, which I mentioned earlier. So we have the male and the female. Now, obviously, besides for what we see, there's the psyche of the human being, of the individual. And these Sphirot that I mentioned earlier, they don't just exist as channels through which God sends his energy and thereby creates the world, but the person themselves is actually a microcosm of this macrocosm, the world. And inside each and every one of us, we also have these 10 Sphirot, which are 10 energies or 10 attributes and characteristics. So we'll start with the first two, which are called Chokhmah and Binah. So what are these two energies? Chokhmah is, they both relate to the mind, to the intellect. Chokhmah is when somebody comes up with a new idea. There's a discovery, a flash of inspiration. They don't yet know where this idea is going to go. They've just had this kind of light bulb moment about something that they're in the middle of studying or exploring or thinking about. They haven't developed the idea yet. That's Chokhmah. It's primarily considered to be a masculine trait. What follows Chokhmah? Bina. Bina is translated as understanding, but to explain what it means is once you've had that flash of inspiration, now you have to develop it. You have to expand on it. You have to think about it down to all the details. How would it apply in this situation? How would it apply in that situation? Would it work if I do it under these conditions or those conditions? Expanding and developing on the original invention that came up in your head. That is Bina. And women we are told that women have an extra measure of this Bina, of this understanding, this ability to expand, this ability to develop. And the beauty of this is that it comes all the way down. These spiritual ideas come all the way down and manifest in very physical ways. So we actually see in the male, we see this in a practical way in the male and in the female, because when we talk about the conception of a child, so the masculine contribution is a small cell, while the feminine contribution comes along and expands on that and develops over 9 months a child down to all the details and all the little body parts. So this is a practical physical manifestation of the spiritual energies that are contained within us. So again, this is an illustration of Mibsari Chazel Oka. If we look at processes that take place in the world, we can understand spiritual realities that exist that we can't actually see with our own eyes. So let's now take all of this and apply it to the days of the week. So we have 6 days of weekday, and then we have Shabbat, which is the 7th day, the day of rest. During the 6 days, we go about our activities, we go about our work, we are trying to accomplish, we are trying to achieve, we might be battling some challenges, some obstacles, some difficulties. We go about our routine. And then what happens on Shabbat? Shabbat is the day of rest. We stop, we take a step back, and we have a chance to reflect, to think about what we've accomplished, to focus on the reasons why we are trying to accomplish that, to focus on the blessings that we have that enable us to accomplish that. And again, that is a reflection of God's work. God created the world in 6 days. For 6 days, he was busy doing, creating, changing what used to be before creation, which is that nothing existed, and now there's a world coming into existence. He was exerting his force to create a world where it didn't exist before. And then came Shabbat. And what did God do? God rested. God did not do anything. He was no longer changing the reality. He was no longer exerting any force. He was just taking a step back and looking at what he had created, appreciating the fruits of his labor, and admiring them. So again, so these two things again, we have the masculine energy, which is the energy of the week, the weekdays where we're working, we're accomplishing, we're creating, we're perhaps struggling with obstacles, with things that are trying to get in the way of what we want to do. And then we have the feminine energy, which is the internal energy, which is Shabbat, where we sit down, we stop the work that we're doing, and we focus on the deeper meaning of everything that we are so busy with during the week. And we absorb all the blessings that come from it. And we also can then project those blessings onto the next week, which is coming. So as I guess the typical situation between a man, a husband and a wife, where the wife says to the husband, you have no idea what just happened, and she starts to complain and tell him about something that went on, and she it's difficult and she can't handle it and all the rest of it. And her husband, in a very well-meaning fashion, says, well, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And the woman's like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand what's going on over here. The husband is very compassionate and he cares that his wife is going through a hard time and he's trying to help her. He wants to solve her problem. So why is the woman not feeling supported by his response to what she's saying? Because I think as women, we can relate to this idea that a woman wants to be heard and listened to. She's not necessarily looking for a solution to her problem. She needs to sort of let it off her chest, express herself, feel heard, feel understood. She can come up with a solution and a way to deal with the situation eventually. But right now, what's important is just for her issue to be heard and felt and received by somebody. That's a very feminine thing. A man is not used to just being in that kind of way, to sort of like sit with the problem and let the problem be. In a man's world, if there's a problem, you have to solve it, you have to do something about it, right? So that's, again, the weekday, we're doing something, we're accomplishing, we're trying to change the world around us. And on Shabbat, that's the time where we just get to be with ourselves, to be with the important ideals that we have, which, on a day-to-day basis, we can't spend the whole day reflecting on why we're accomplishing whatever we're accomplishing, because then we won't be able to do anything because we're too busy thinking about it. So during the week, we're busy, we're more in that masculine mode. And on Shabbat, it's the feminine mode where we get to just be and reflect and absorb the energy of the goodness from the week prior, and then go ahead and pass that on to the coming week. And Shabbat is actually called, Shabbat is considered to be the source of blessing for the entire week for this reason. And in a similar fashion, a woman is considered to be the source of blessing for her entire home. I'll just get the quote for you. It says in the Talmud, blessing only comes to a man's household for the sake of his wife. So again, we're adding now to the previous idea that we said, which is that a woman does have a more special connection to what goes on in the home, and is considered to be to have a much greater impact on the home than the man. Why? Because the home is that internal thing. When you go out and you're working or you're interacting or you're accomplishing in some way in the outside world, that's the masculine energy, projecting, exerting energy, trying to change something, trying to accomplish. And then when you come home, you're no longer in that mode of accomplishment and doing and changing. When you come home, it's your time to go inward and reflect and refresh and rejuvenate for the next day. So because in our essence as women, we have that inner, that more inward energy, we have that special responsibility and impact on the home in a way, in a unique way. So again, what I mentioned before, that's why it says that a blessing comes to the home because of the wife, because of the woman. I meant to mention this before, but I'll just mention it now. Shabbat is called Shabbat HaMalka, the Shabbat Queen. Again, female, feminine, because it's a feminine energy that dominates on Shabbat. So all these all these things that take place in the home, which are nurturing, developing, meeting the person where they are and trying to build them up from within. Those are all the things that take place in the home. And that's connected to a woman's essence, which is why a woman has a special role in the home. That's obviously not to exclude a woman from being able to accomplish and contribute in a meaningful way outside of the home, not at all. It's just to come. It's just to come and help us understand why we also have this special connection, specifically within the home as well. Is there any questions? Is it still clear? Are we still?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
You know, you know, but I guess that, you know, one of the things, and this is just totally, you know, the balance between, you know, 6 days of, you know, male energy and doing and whatever, and one day of reflection and, you know, more of the feminine aspect, you know, I just, you know, I think that's interesting to think about because, you know, I don't know necessarily that that's, you know, really a good thing. And I don't know if, you know, if just, you know, as speculative, if another pattern would be better or, you know, so, but.
You're saying because you feel like it's an imbalance?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, actually, within each and every day, we have a similar dynamic in a bit of a lesser way. But for example, just to explain, you know, we wake up in the morning. There's a special prayer that we say, Modani, acknowledging that God has given us, returned our soul to us, so that we can, we have the gift to accomplish and do our mission in this world for another day. And the day is supposed to start off with prayer. Why is the day supposed to start off with prayer? Why don't we just wake up? It's a weekday. Let's run and accomplish whatever we have to do, because we need that reflective time every single day as well. It's not just enough, as you say, it's not just enough to wait an entire week till Shabbat and then we get that time. We do need it every day, and there's not only one prayer a day, but there are actually 3 prayers a day. So we do get that that rhythm of having the chance to, you know, connect. And, you know, the first prayer of the day is the longest one. So we have the time to really set ourselves up to sort of focus and position ourselves. And then we can go out and start doing whatever it is that we're supposed to be accomplishing. The later prayers are a bit shorter, but again, we have that break to stop, to reflect. So every single day it happens in that kind of way. And then we get, at the end of the week, we need, you know, if we just keep up that pattern every day, day by day by day by day, it's not enough. We need some extra time. So we get, in addition to that, we get Shabbat, which is 24 hours of full on just focus on this idea, so that we can collect extra energy and an extra measure of blessing for the week ahead. Does that make it clearer?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll just add as a side note, not completely connected to the class, but connected to Shabbat, where there's a list of prohibitions of things that we're not allowed to do in Shabbat. For example, connected to agriculture, but obviously there's other ones which are more relevant, but, you know, planting, plowing, different creative things that we're not allowed to do. why these specific things? Because if we analyze them more carefully, we realize that each of these things are connected to creating or accomplishing or doing in some kind of way, trying to exert our influence on the world, and which is really the weekday masculine mode. And on Shabbat, we're supposed to be in that feminine inner mode. So we're trying to create and maintain that kind of atmosphere. And if we would be engaging in those kind of activities, which are of the other energy, which are not related to Shabbat, that is considered to be a violation of Shabbat. So just to, again, this follows on what I said a bit earlier, the physical or practical manifestations of how we see things, whether it's in a natural process that takes place in the world, or whether it's in a practical law that God gave us to fulfill, they're actually outgrowths of a spiritual concept or a spiritual entity that exists. And that is why, in a practical way, we are told to behave like this or like that in specific situations. So I thought that just was something interesting to mention. So just in continuation to what I mentioned about the woman and the home, as well, the specific mitzvot that are given to women over that men don't have, such as lighting the Shabbat candles, the baking of the challah, which is really just a symbol for the general field of preparing food and keeping kosher in the home, and the mitzvah of mikvah. These things really connect with the more internal energies that we talk about when we speak about the essence of a female. So the candle lighting, for example, that's a reflection of the light and the warmth and the atmosphere that a woman imbues in the home. Like, you know, the saying, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. You know, the woman really has an effect on the tone that is set. And again, the challah and the food, that's a representation of nourishment of the house, of the people in the household, whether that's physical nourishment, but also emotional well-being and physical and spiritual well-being. And then you have the mikvah, which is really a combination of the two, because it relates to the body and to the soul. When you have husband and wife coming together and uniting in the marital union, you have the physical union, and you also have at that moment the spiritual union, where, as I mentioned in the beginning, the two halves of the soul reconnect again, and that has a major impact. That has a major impact within the household, and it's a special thing that a woman is able to do to bring that harmony between the physical and the spiritual. Again, as we look at, you know, the mitzvah of challah, for example, preparing food and, you know, and preparing meals can be a very mundane task, but there's a spirituality that's inherent in there that a woman is able to access and to develop for her family. So just to end off, I'd like to share a video which is connected to the ideas that we've spoken today, and also connected specifically to the unusual times that we find ourselves in. So I'm just going to share it over here. Sorry.
to our countless brothers and sisters suffering the impact of coronavirus. May God miraculously heal all who are ill, comfort those who are mourning, and provide ample livelihood for all. For the first time in history, around the world, streets and social venues are empty, as people are confined to and isolated in their homes. To understand the spiritual significance of this unprecedented phenomenon, we need to take a trip back in time. Shortly after taking the Jews out of Egypt, God instructed them, "Make for me a sanctified space, so that I will dwell among you." For some unfathomable reason, an infinite God wanted a physical home in this world. At first, God called home the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle built by Moses, erected at first in the desert and later in the Holy Land. Thereafter, the divine presence found home in Jerusalem, the first temple built by King Solomon, and its replacement built by the returning Babylonian exiles. With the destruction of the Second Temple, 1,500 years of Jewish worship at a single central address came to a crashing halt. The Jews were scattered in exile, across the map and across countless centuries. Where will we house God now? The persecuted people asked their sages. Wherever you are, came the reply. Construct mini sanctuaries and micro temples. God will make them all his home. Indeed, for 1900 years, our synagogues, study halls, and Torah schools served as the epicenter of Jewish life and as God's home.
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus emergency in the U.S.
But now, a devastating virus sweeps the planet, forcing synagogues, study halls, and schools to close their doors. Where will we find God now? Make for me a sanctified space, so that I will dwell among you. God's ultimate home is among you, the Jewish people. In our homes, in our living rooms, dining rooms, kitchens, and bedrooms. Indeed, we have arrived at the final frontier in the globalization of God's home. Here are some ways we can rise to the calling to turn our personal space into a brilliant abode for the Creator. A Jewish dwelling should contain a chumash, a siddur, and other holy texts. Let us fill the air with God's words, and God will fill the atmosphere in our homes. When we attach a charity box to the kitchen wall, our homes become parts of a divine act of kindness. Kosher mezuzahs on all doorways, because God's presence rests where it is invited. Let us sync our menus with God's will to become receptive to God's presence. 18 minutes before sundown, each Friday afternoon, let us fill our homes with light. Across the planet, people are terrified of bringing it home. But really, it is time for God to come home, to our homes.
Okay, so that the message over there underscores really how much holiness and potential and closeness with God is possible, and really how much focus there is on that in each and every single Jewish home. So I'd just like to end with continuing the parallel of the weekdays and Shabbat. So we know that historically masculine traits have been the ones that were admired, looked up to, and people were aspiring to it. But as we've come through history, today there are many of the feminine traits which have gained a lot of appreciation and admiration and are seen to be very, very valuable. Just an example, again, what we spoke about, integration and connection, which is more of a feminine trait, where you would expect from a woman to be communicative. If you have a conversation, you can you can ask a man, yeah, how's your day? How you doing? And you go, oh yeah, it's good. And that's the end. Speak to a woman, you say, oh, how you doing? How's your day? And get ready. Oh, I'm so glad you asked this morning, this happened and then that happened. And I'm feeling so terrible because, and it goes on. And there's a lot to say. But that imposition from above, that sort of giving orders and people just follow, if we think in the workplace, for example, effective and good leadership now is expected to take employees into account, to listen to ideas from workers, to communicate, to harness people's individual strengths. These are all female characteristics which are now being seen as wonderful and valuable, and even valued over the way that things traditionally have been. And if we look back along the timeline of history, so from the beginning of creation of the world until now, we are now in the 6th millennium, according to the Hebrew calendar, and each millennium it corresponds to one day of creation, like the 6 days of creation, and we're headed towards the 7th millennium, which is the time where it's not going to just be one Shabbat, like the end of the week. It's going to be Shabbat all over for all the world. We're going to reach that time where we have accomplished and done everything that we have to do, and then we can look back and appreciate and receive the blessings and the fruits of our labor and be able to focus more internally. So we are now at that time, at the end of the